You're watching Organized Breaking News.
National security, the rule of law, the future of our democracy. That's what's at stake for Attorney General Merrick Garland as he considers indicting former President Donald Trump. With this week's flurry of filings and disclosures and court orders, it's easy to lose sight of the big picture. But Josh Gerstein of Politico drives it home. Quote, "Of course, one unknown ultimately looms large over all the other machinations. Does Garland view Trump's cavalier and even defiant approach to the national security secrets at Mar-a-Lago as something of sufficient magnitude to bring the first criminal case against a former president in United States history?" Because remember, we also have the 1-6 committee investigating Trump's role in the violence and the destruction at the U.S. Capitol, all because he believed in the big lie. And speaking of the big lie, this week, Trump's former lawyer, John Eastman, appeared before a grand jury in Fulton County, Georgia. That grand jury is investigating efforts to overturn the 2020 election in that state. Eastman pleaded the Fifth. So how will these various criminal cases against Trump and his acolytes play out in our nation's courts? The answer will have long-standing consequences for our country. As Gerstein puts it, the political fallout of a losing case against a former president could be devastating. Joining me now is Politico's senior legal affairs reporter, Josh Gerstein. Josh, my friend, thank you so much for being here. Look, you've spoken with former prosecutors, intelligence agency lawyers, Justice Department officials. What have they shared with you about some of the considerations that Merrick Garland is thinking about and ruminating over in order to make a decision on whether or not to indict Donald Trump?
Well, Katie, congratulations on the show, by the way. They tell me that, this is one of these crimes where when you look at the statute book and you look at the elements in it, I don't want to say it's irrelevant to the decision he has to make, because it has some relevance, but it's really not that helpful. This whole area, especially around classified information, the Espionage Act, these statutes are very, very broad. Anybody who has national defense information that the government wants back could theoretically be charged with a felony under the Espionage Act. And yet we all know that that doesn't happen very often. And so there are a lot of other considerations, even in a more run-of-the-mill case, that come into play. One factor is how deceptive is the suspect or the person they're considering charging being. Another consideration is how sensitive is the information. We all know there's a lot of information in our government that is classified, and sometimes it isn't actually that sensitive. So these are the kinds of considerations they look at. Sometimes the volume alone is enough to get somebody charged, someone who's been bringing dozens and dozens of top secret documents to their house for years. Even if they had no plans to give them to anybody, they're just a hoarder, let's say, as it seems like it's possible Trump might have been. Sometimes that is enough to get people charged. But as we alluded to in the story, ultimately there's a bigger consideration here about, does Merrick Garland think what happened at Mar-a-Lago is of sufficient gravity that he's sort of willing to stake so many chips on a prosecution of Trump?
Yeah, but Josh, this was not inadvertent, right? We don't have a oops from Donald Trump. I'm so sorry that I accidentally, in the haste to leave the White House, packed up these documents. To your point about the sheer volume, I mean, the reporting now, based upon that unsealed, detailed inventory that I'm going to ask you about in a minute or so, I mean, it's more than 10,000 government documents. And so to some extent, Josh, is it just too simplified to say that because Trump had tens of thousands of documents that shouldn't have belonged to him in the first place, shouldn't that be sufficient enough for Garland to say, I'm going to make an example of somebody like Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, I think we need a little more information than we currently have. How involved was former President Trump in all of these records? This is one of these issues. His lawyers have said, well, why were his passports scooped up? Why would the government need that? Well, one of the things prosecutors are going to have to try to figure out here is, did he know about all of these records? I think it seems to a lot of us that he did, because nobody else seemed to have an interest in holding on to them. But if they wanted to go to court, they might have to prove that he knew these documents were down there, or did he delegate everything to other people? And so, it's not quite as simple as a hoarder who has stuff in his house and there's no one else living there, or they're the only person that works for the National Security Agency in the house, so they must have brought all these materials there. He has these minions around him, and frankly, Katie, he's been pretty successful in the past in passing blame off to those people and saying, oh, did that happen? I told them to be totally cooperative with you, so I'm really shocked. That's sort of been his MO.
So, Josh, I do want to talk about this detailed property inventory list. It was court-ordered by way of stipulation, by the way. So the Department of Justice and Trump's team said, we completely agree, Judge, that this can be unsealed. It was just unsealed, and we got it today. I mean, Josh, 43 empty folders that should have contained, or the empty folders had classified banners or return to staff secretary / military aid. I mean, to your point, Josh, about how much was Trump aware, the amazing thing about this inventory is that it also explains where these things were found. In his office, in storage rooms. I mean, and so don't you think, Josh, then it kind of is the DOJ saying to the world and to Trump's team, we got the goods. We know exactly where things were. His personal stuff was commingled with things, but more scarily, where are the missing classified documents?
Right. I mean, and some of this stuff came out of the drawer of his desk, or at least a desk in his office at Mar-a-Lago. Again, who stores stuff in the drawers of other people's desks? At a certain point, it begs credulity to say that that stuff belonged to somebody else. On the other hand, I think, the argument you probably get from Trump's side is that he was careless and cavalier with this sort of information when he was president, and it was more a question of carrying those practices on to Mar-a-Lago than any effort to actually deprive the government of any information. In fact, at the hearing yesterday in West Palm Beach, one of his lawyers said, look, Mar-a-Lago basically was the White House for 4 years. He used it regularly for official business. And so we actually don't know that all these materials were moved down there. I guess it's conceivable some of it was being kept there. Again, if it was being kept there, it really wasn't being kept there properly, because stuff that has top secret SCI markings on it shouldn't be sitting in anybody's desk, regardless of the circumstances. So, but again, is that a criminal case? I don't know. It's a complicated situation that DOJ is going to have to wade through.
Josh, I got less than a minute. I did want to ask you quickly before I had to let you go. You were there in the courtroom yesterday. As a former trial lawyer, I missed the courtroom. But can you just kind of give us a little bit of some inside baseball in terms of what was the vibe? Like, what did you pick up on when you're inside the courtroom from Judge Cannon, Trump-appointed Judge Aileen Cannon, the lawyers for Trump, and the two separate teams that came from the DOJ?
Well, it was very serious. I don't remember there being any jokes cracked like there normally are at a lot of court hearings I was at. Some of the lawyers had not met before. I think Jay Bratt, the lead prosecutor for the Justice Department, has dealt with Evan Corcoran before. But Christopher Keiss, who is the new lawyer Trump brought in, hadn't met before, and so they sort of exchanged greetings before the session. It did seem like Judge Cannon was interested in digging each side on specific issues. On the defense side, she thought that their proposal for a special master was a little vague, and she kept pressing them on, what exactly is it that you're asking me to do here? And on the prosecution side, she seemed to have questions about whether executive privilege might actually apply to some of these documents, even though a lot of legal scholars have said it wouldn't apply in this context. She's not so sure about that, and I think that's why we're probably going to see her impose a special master with a pretty broad mandate that will allow the Trump side to raise these executive privilege claims. Well,
you, like me, like the rest of the people that are interested, are waiting to see what that order says. Not sure if it's going to come out before the holiday weekend. Maybe it will later today. Politico's Josh Gerstein, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie.